Seafaring is transnational by nature. As seafarers travel from port to port, they come under the jurisdiction of many different states, each with their own laws and legal regulations. Increasingly, seafarers of all ranks are finding themselves at risk of facing investigations or criminal charges as a consequence of their professional activities, often for incidents that were beyond their control. Escalating legal obligations and sometimes aggressive attitudes to prosecutions are impacting across the maritime industry. Recent high-profile cases have shown that the legal situation for seafarers is complex, especially following maritime incidents where there's environmental damage or loss of life.
Hundreds of thousands of seafarers are in one port or another, and they are subject to criminalization just for performing their duties. In many cases, seafarers may be considered guilty before they even have an investigation.
Seafarers are very professional, but they can cope with many things, but you don't expect a collision. You don't expect someone to be smuggling people, drugs or arms on your ship.
They can be criminalized in countries that they don't know the legal system, they don't know the culture, they don't speak the language, and they are guilty until proven innocent.
On November 19, 2002, the Prestige, an oil tanker containing 77,000 tons of fuel, ruptured one of its tanks while caught in a storm off the coast of Spain. Captain Apostolos Mangouras tried to bring the ship into port, but was refused by the authorities in Spain, France and Portugal. 6 days later, the ship broke in two and began to sink, spilling its cargo into the sea off the coast of Galicia. Captain Mangouras was immediately arrested by the Spanish authorities and jailed in a high-security prison for 85 days. He was released only on payment of bail of €3 million. Even after bail was paid, he had to report to the police daily. Despite Captain Mangouras having done everything he could to avoid the disaster, criminal charges were brought against him and court actions continued for more than 10 years. On December 7, 2007, a crane barge being towed through rough waters off Korea's Yellow Sea broke free from its towing lines and collided with the anchored crude oil tanker Hebe Spirit. The collision pierced 3 of the 5 oil tanks, leaking almost 11,000 tons of oil into the sea, causing an environmental disaster. Following an investigation by the Korean Coast Guard, the captains of the 2 tugs, the barge and the Hebe Spirit, were all charged with offences, including negligence and violating marine pollution laws. Captain Jasprit Chawla and Chief Officer Siam Chetan were detained in South Korea for a total of 550 days, despite unprecedented protests from the global maritime industry. Criminalization is not rampant, but the fear of criminalization is real and a deterrent for seafarers going to sea and taking promotion into senior ranks. In 2012, Seafarers Rights International carried out a survey of 3,480 seafarers of 68 nationalities. Seafarers were asked if they'd faced criminal charges, and if so, what were their experiences. 8% of seafarers and 24% of masters had faced criminal charges. The 3 most common charges related to incidents of pollution, collision, and fatal accidents. Seafarers were also asked about their experiences if they'd faced criminal charges. The results indicated that a real problem still exists. 91% were not provided interpretation services. 90% did not have legal representation. 88% did not have their legal rights explained to them. 80% felt intimidated or threatened. 46% said that they'd be reluctant to cooperate fully and openly with casualty inquiries and accident investigations. Overall, 81% of seafarers who faced criminal charges did not consider that they'd received fair treatment. And 85% were concerned about criminalization.
Seafarers Rights International had an exceptional response from many different nationalities of seafarers, which identified quite a number of things that we were concerned about.
The survey pointed out a number of issues that the seafarers have. All he wants to assure is that he's being treated fairly, that the governments are not going to incriminate him, that the seafarers have an opportunity to defend themselves, that everyone work together and not just assume that the seafarer is guilty, and that the outcome, in the end, is appropriate and it is fair.
The international stakeholders have responded to the problem of criminalization, and in 2006 the International Maritime Organization and the International Labour Organization jointly issued guidelines on the fair treatment of seafarers in the event of a maritime accident.
From 2002 to 2010, I was the chairman of the ITF Maritime section. I led the workers at the UN International Labour Organization and International Maritime Organization. We developed the Fair Treatment Guidelines, which were completed in 2006.
The Fair Treatment Guidelines set out how seafarers should be treated following a maritime accident and during any investigation and detention by public authorities. They ensure that seafarers' human rights are upheld and that detention is for no longer than necessary. The guidance has been provided to port and coastal states, flag states, seafarer states, ship owners, and seafarers.
The IMO guidelines on fair treatment of seafarers is all based on human rights standards, which gives it real teeth. If the guidelines are followed, seafarers would have the ability to be treated fairly and would be less reluctant to cooperate with the authorities.
It's crucial that we're able to use those on a global level with a consistent approach so that we can call on them not just as guidelines, but in a way that can ensure a systematic global rollout that means all seafarers are treated in whatever jurisdiction they might arrive in.
If you find yourself involved in a criminal investigation, it's important to understand that not all states offer the same rights and protections. Every situation is different. An investigation means you're likely to come into contact with people from a range of organizations and people involved in law enforcement. You may not speak the local language and you may not know why the investigation is taking place. But there are a number of things you can do to protect yourself.
One, they could educate themselves. There's certainly plenty of information on the ITF website, the Seafarers Rights International website. Their employers provide a lot of documentation. Certainly they need to do everything they can to educate themselves. But the industry as a whole has a big job not only to educate the seafarers, but to educate the governments on applying the IMO standards.
If a maritime accident or incident occurs and there is an investigation, ask what is the basis for the investigation. If you don't speak the local language, ask for an interpreter. In the event that you're detained, it's important that you try to contact someone. You should request to communicate with your ship owner, union officials, local ITF inspectors, the local consul or embassy in port of the flag state or your home state, seafarers missions in port, and your family members. You should be a member of a union. Ask for your rights. Legal representation is essential to receiving a fair trial. Your employer should provide you with a lawyer, but there are instances where there may be a conflict of interest between you and your employer, so you should seek your own legal representation through legal aid if available. You should participate in the investigation and provide truthful information to the best of your knowledge and belief. But you should fully understand your right not to self-incriminate, and that when statements are made to port, coastal or flag state investigators, these may potentially be used in a future criminal prosecution.
The problem is they need support. They don't know their rights. They don't know where to go. The ITF has 138 inspectors in 57 countries, and these ITF inspectors are officials that can assist seafarers in the event that they are charged or have any dealings with public authorities. An ITF inspector visits vessels to ensure that seafarers' collective bargaining agreements are adhered to. And if there's any problems that seafarers have on board, they assist and support them. We have websites that have all of the contact information of our inspectors. It's itfseafarers.org. We also have and support ISWAN, which is a welfare organization, with a 24/7 seafarers helpline, and that can be found at seafarerhelp.org.
The ITF and its national unions are very active in all representation for seafarers. So there are a lot of cases where we've had to help seafarers who've been criminalised, charged, sometimes without due respect to their human rights. It's our job to educate the seafarers about their rights and make sure that we protect them when they're in a crisis or a conflict situation. The ITF is committed to protect seafarers from criminalisation, and we will not stop until we eradicate it on a global level.
Though your chance of being involved in a criminal investigation is relatively small, it is significantly higher for seafarers, and so it's important to be aware of the potential risks and to know what to do when things go wrong. For more information on seafarers' legal rights, visit www.seafarersrights.org.